All right, so our next problem is we're going to solve for 4 plus 1/5 r, and that's going to be equal to -1. And so this one is going to be a little different from the ones that we've seen in the past. We are going to be using an inverse of a fraction. So we're going to talk about that just a little bit to make sure that you're good on what we're doing. So remember that what we want to do is we're going to solve for our variable r. And if we're solving for a variable, meaning that we're isolating the variable, we're going to use PEMDAS, but we're going to use it in reverse order. So I noticed that the r, our variable, is not by itself. I see that we are adding, let me start with r. We are multiplying by 1/5. And then I also see that we are adding 4. Okay, so we're going to start from addition and subtraction. I notice that we have a positive 4. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. When you're adding or subtracting, remember you want it to become 0. So you'll need to use the inverse operation in order for you to do that. And you're just going to use the opposite number on the number line. So this was a positive 4, so I'm going to use a -4. By doing that, that cancels out. We're left with 1/5 r. It's a positive. 1/5 times r, and that is going to be equal to -1 minus 4. So both of them are going in the negative direction. So remember, if they're going in the same direction, you use addition. So 4 plus 1 is 5, and they are going in the negative direction. All right, so now what we need to do is we still see that the r is not isolated because I see that it's being multiplied by 1/5. Okay, but the only thing is, I notice that this is a fraction. Okay, so there's a couple ways that we could figure this out, and I'm just going to show you the way that actually it took me a long time to figure this out and understand it. But I will also show you the other way that I've always done it before I figured out about the multiplicative inverses and why it actually works. So we learn some different things like concepts as far as math, and it may not necessarily make sense for us. And for me, if it doesn't make sense, then I just don't want to use it. I don't feel comfortable using it. So let me explain what's going to happen here. I see that I'm multiplying, right? And so typically, if we're multiplying, then I know that I need to divide, right, to get rid of it. Well, here's a way that we could look at this: 1/5, okay, times, remember, if we're multiplying or dividing, we need this to become 1, right? So 1/5 times its inverse, which would be 5/1. What happens? We get 5 times 1, or 1 times 5, we get 5. 5 times 1, we get 5. And notice that it becomes 1, right? So if I multiply this by its inverse, or its reciprocal, I should say. If I multiply by the reciprocal, then it becomes 1. So if I do that to both sides, so in other words, this is 1/5, so I'm going to multiply 5/1, and then I'm going to do the same thing over here, 5/1. Okay? By doing that, let's see what happens. We have 5 times 1, that becomes 5, which we just saw. And then 1 times 5, that becomes 5. And then we have our r here, and that's going to be equal to 5 as a whole number. Hopefully, we remember that any whole number that has a denominator of 1, right? So this is -5 times 5/1. Okay. So we have 5 times 5, that gives me 25. Negative times a positive gives me a negative. And then 1 times 1 gives me 1. Positive and a positive, that will still remain a positive. So look at what we have here. We have 5/5. So this actually cancels out because this becomes 1, right? We know that any number divided by itself is always going to be 1. So this cancels out. You're left with r on the left-hand side, and that is going to be equal to -25/1. This is the same thing as -25. Okay? So if you found that a bit challenging, then let me show you the other method on how I would solve this. Oh, I didn't clean this board off. All right, so we're going to look at the same problem. Second way that we can solve for this, we have 4 plus 1/5 r is equal to -1. Okay, and remember, we're going to still use PEMDAS. Okay, and we're going to use it in in reverse order because we are trying to isolate the variable. So again, I noticed that the r is not by itself. I see that we are multiplying by 1/5, and then I'm adding 4. But I'm going to show you that other way that I was telling you about. So when I look at it the other way, instead of looking at it as 1/5 times r, I'm going to actually place this because this is the same thing as saying r over 1, right? So let me show you what I mean. 1/5 times r, that would be the same thing as r over 1, okay? So this here, 1 times r, that means that we still have r, and then 5 times 1, that's 5, right? So r over 5. So 1/5 times r or r divided by 5, either one of them is the same thing. So we're going to look at it in this way so that you can better understand the other method that I'm going to show you. So this is 4 plus, instead of r being by itself, we multiplied it and it became r over 5, and then that's going to be equal to -1. All right. So first things first, we're starting with addition and subtraction. I see that we're adding 4, so I'm going to use the opposite or the inverse sign um, operation, and that's -4 from both sides. So 4 minus 4, that becomes 0. I'm left with r divided by 5, and that is going to be equal to -5. Okay. So, is the variable by itself? No, it's not, because I see that we're dividing by 5. So, again, we're working our way up. So, we're talking about division or multiplication. So, if we're dividing, then I need to multiply both sides by 5, right? So, this is the same thing as 5 times r over 5. And I'm going to multiply this side by 5 as well. By doing that, 5 divided by 5, that becomes 1. So, we're left with r is equal to -25. So those are two ways that we can look at isolating our variable. You can look at the r as like um, in division form, or you can look at it in terms of multiplication. So either one of them will get you the same answer of r is equal to -25.